to the debrief, everybody. Defendant Henry Segura taking the stand today to convince another jury he is not a quadruple killer. Prosecutors say Segura killed his girlfriend Brandy Peters, their 3-year-old child, and Peters' twin 6-year-old daughters. The state says the motive was $20,000 in unpaid child support, which prevented Segura from getting a 6-figure job overseas. But Segura says Peters was a drug mule who was killed by a cartel who caught her stealing money. Segura began his testimony by admitting to 2 prior misdemeanor convictions for fraud. Then he described his relationship with his son Javante and his girlfriend Brandy's 2 twin girls.
Whenever me and Brandy was together, I brought Pampers, brought clothes. I stayed home with him, watched him when I could, whenever I wasn't working. Just whatever it was the father was supposed to do at the time, I was there.
The twins were
Jennifer,
approximately how old when Javante was born?
I believe they were around 3.
And what was your relationship with the twins?
They were more like my kids than Javante because I spent more time with them before he was born. Okay. I potty trained them. When I first met her, they were wearing pull-ups. I got them out of pull-ups and potty trained them so they were wearing panties. I cooked for them. I brought them to school. Picked them up whenever the van didn't bring them home. I was just being a father figure.
Segura says he stayed in a relationship with victim Brandy Peters until their son Javante was about 4 months old. He says Peters suggested Javante was not really his child. And then Segura made these statements about his sexual appetite in front of the jury to explain why he was married and seeing other women like Peters.
Probably from the first year of our marriage.
And that's your main vice, right? You make no bones about that. You were a cheater, a philanderer, all
most
that.
Most people smoke crack, do heroin. That's my drug of choice. I don't drink, I don't smoke, do any drugs. That was my drug of choice. I'm not proud of it, but that's what I did.
Segura says he was already giving Peters cash, so he put himself on child support just to have a record of it. The defense tried to show the $20,000 Segura owed to Peters isn't much of a motive.
With Brandy and Javante, I lived in the house with her. I was there when Javante was born. I had receipts of the money orders when I gave her cash for the money with the money orders. I had receipts for clothes and all the clothes I brought him, Pampers I brought him. So that would have proved and showed to the judge that I was in his life from the day he was born up until the 3 years when she put me on the child support, when the paperwork came through. So that would have reduced the $20,000 arrears that they tried to put on me drastically.
Days before the murders, victim Brandy Peters texted the defendant upset that he owed her so much money. Segura says he apologized and told her that he was out of work because he'd been shot. That's true. He did admit he went over to the crime scene the day of the murders.
Around 3 o'clock is when I headed back towards her house because I knew that's about time she should be home with the girls.
And what vehicle were you driving when you went over there?
My truck.
Your green pickup truck?
Yes, sir. I parked my truck at the church near her house.
Why'd you do that?
Because I didn't want to park right in front of her house so that any neighbor that knew my wife or whatever would see my truck at her house.
How long were you back in your vehicle for before Brandy's mom left?
Probably an hour or so, a little more. I waited until I seen her mother's truck leave.
Okay. What did you do at that point?
I walked back down the hill, walked to her house, got to the corner, made a left, I cut through the neighbor's yard and went in the house.
Do you know about what time that would have been?
It was close to 5 o'clock, I believe.
How long did it take for you and Brandy to hook up?
Not long, about 15, 20 minutes.
And did you utilize any kind of prophylactic?
Yes, sir, I used the condom.
What happened next?
We went in the living room and watched television. Let me see, she called the kids in, the kids came in. I tried to spend a little time with Javante, trying to interact with him a little bit.
Segura insists he left the scene after Brandy Peters ate dinner around 7:45. Prosecutors, however, say that's the time of the murders. Segura contests the state's timeline. Attorney Latonia Hines is with me tonight. So, Latonia, was it a good idea for this defendant to take the stand, in your opinion?
So, I mean, it's a twofold thing. As a defense attorney, when I've been one, you don't want to put your client on the stand if you're not sure of what they're going to say and how they're going to hold up in cross-examination. As a prosecutor, you're going to always want the defendant on the stand so that you can kind of poke holes at their statements. He was pretty consistent the whole entire time, I thought, but it's still not explaining away some of the inconsistencies and the false statements that he made to the police when their initial investigation.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go with that. You know, he's trying to come across like a likable guy, not showing a lot of emotion, though.
No, he's not showing a lot of emotion, but that's also a part of the defense theory as to why he did not respond more when they were telling him about the deaths of Brandy and the children. However, you know, coming from a prosecutor's stance, I thought that didn't play off very well to me. I thought that, you know, he did talk about having lost a child before this and this happening, and how he's not used to showing a lot of emotions because the way he was brought up. But to me, what it also showed was that here's somebody that the jury could believe could be somewhat cold-hearted and do this because he doesn't show a lot of emotion.
Yeah, let's go through the cross-examination now, Latonia, if we can. On cross, prosecutors did not quite believe Segura when he downplayed his child support debt.
You're saying that all I had was $106 in my name. That's very inaccurate, according to the $1,455 I withdrew.
Well, I'm sure you had rent, you had other child support, you had a lot of things you were trying to pay. But I'm saying on this date, that was my question to you, that you had $106 in your account.
Yeah, in the account,
and
yes.
this was the day before the murders, right?
Well, I didn't even look at the date. I looked at how much it was. But regardless, yes, it was $106 in the account.
That was your available balance the day before these murders?
Right.
Okay. And if you could just get Department of Revenue off your back by paying a little bit, you would have, wouldn't you?
That's all I had to do was pay them some money, and yeah.
But you didn't pay them any money. You didn't pay them any money in August, did you?
No.
You didn't pay them any money in September?
No.
Or October?
No.
Or November?
No.
Right? And then after November, you didn't have to pay any money anymore, right?
Unfortunately, no.
The tension was building there, and then prosecutors pressed Segura about why he didn't come forward to investigators about lying in his police interview about having an affair with the victim. That is when things got really heated.
I told the lady Johnson, Investigator Johnson,
You told
over
her
the phone that I was cheating on my wife. I didn't want y'all to find out. And she, excuse me, and she, like I say, she went back and forth, and we was arguing about, she know I killed my son. We're gonna arrest you for killing your son, and I hung up on him.
So your testimony is that you told police in this case over the phone,
Investigator Johnson.
Wait a minute, don't interrupt her question, Mr. Segura. Let her finish her question.
She's asking the same question over and over.
Be quiet.
No, she's.
Be quiet. Now, she asks you a question, you wait till she finishes
I'm a
the
grown
question,
man.
and then answer it, okay?
Yeah.
And she won't interrupt your answer either, because a court reporter can't take down two people at once. Is that clear? Sir?
Yeah, that's very clear.
All right.
Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. Meanwhile, one of the men expected to be a key defense witness sat down on the stand and immediately said, "I'm not testifying." The defense says Gregory Washington wore a police wire to record his cousin one day. The cousin is said in the recording to have claimed that he and another man were involved with this whole thing because Peters was stealing drug money. That's according to this recording. After Washington refused to testify, the jury left the courtroom, and then this.
You got me on live TV.
Well, you were on live TV last
I know I'm not testifying.
Well, you've already given this testimony once.
I'm not testifying. I asked to speak. I spoke with Mr. Prince concerning this issue. I wrote him and I contacted his office and I explained to him my situation. I asked him to speak with him. I talked with people in his office. They know why I'm not testifying, but he still got me up here like this.
Back now with attorney Latonia Hines. So, Latonia, we've got this guy saying, I'm not going to testify. He was supposed to be the key witness here, one of them for the defense. Is it going to trash the defense's case?
I don't think it necessarily trashes the case, but it definitely throws a wrench in it because he had key testimony of giving you doubt in that you've got some other person to look for as a possible suspect in doing the murder other than the defendant. It was very dramatic today with him saying he wasn't going to testify. And so they had to kind of change things around, but they still have his sworn testimony. So it'll be interesting to see how they use that.
Yeah, exactly. They're just going to say, hey, look, he's an unavailable witness. We'll read back the previous sworn testimony. What do you make of the defendant, Segura, getting up there and arguing with the judge the way he did? I didn't think that was a good look.
Never good. It's never a good look. And it takes away from you seeming like, oh, I'm a caring dad and I pay for my kids all the time. He seemed very testy. This is somebody who could get mad. This is somebody who could get angry. And you got a chance to see that. And I don't think that's a good thing for the defense.
Oh, look, I think the prosecutor probably loved it, though, because that's exactly what the prosecutor wanted the jury to see. And how do juries judge cases? They look at the body language and the tone. And there, as you said, I agree with you, Latonia, we didn't catch a very good tone from that defendant. Let's move on now. Jury selection underway in the death penalty trial of a Florida man accused of murdering his wife. Dr. Teresa Severs bludgeoned to death at home back in 2015. Her husband, Mark Severs, was one of 3 men charged in the killing. He apparently vomited into a trash can in court today, bringing a temporary halt to jury selection. One of his co-defendants pleaded guilty. A jury convicted the other one of second-degree murder in Dr. Severs' death. And still ahead tonight here on the Debrief, a hearing in the case of a man accused of killing an Iowa college student. We'll explain the testimony about the fall corn harvest and why it is so legally relevant to whether Christian Rivera will be successfully tried on murder charges. A hearing today in Iowa to determine whether evidence against a defendant accused of murdering a college student will be thrown out of court. Prosecutors say Christian Rivera confessed to arguing with Molly Tibbetts, confessed that there was blood, confessed to putting her in corn, and then took officers to where he dumped the body. But the state concedes that the officers who questioned Rivera failed to read his full Miranda rights, and much of his so-called confession must be thrown out of court. The state agrees that. Our coverage begins with the first officer who spoke to Rivera. That officer testified that surveillance video of the area where Tibbetts was last seen jogging revealed a black Chevy Malibu with chrome mirrors and door handles circling the area. Officers eventually saw the vehicle, but their first conversation with the driver, Rivera, did not lead to an arrest.
I was driving a dark blue Dodge Durango, an unmarked sheriff's vehicle. I was driving north on Highway 63. Approaching the Interstate 80 interchange, and as I went under the overpass, I noticed a vehicle matching that description had stopped at the westbound off ramp. I pulled off the shoulder and followed it, noted the license plate number, followed it into town. I saw it turn into the alley. I followed it into the alley, and by the time I pulled up to where that car was, the driver turned out to be Mr. Rivera. Had exited his vehicle and was walking towards a house.
Did you ask Mr. Rivera about Molly Tibbetts' disappearance?
I did. I said we were interviewing people, talking to people about the disappearance of Molly Tibbetts. He said he had heard there was a girl missing, but said he didn't know anything about it.
What was Mr. Rivera's demeanor like during your interaction with him?
Calm. Nothing, honestly, that really put any red flags up at that time as far as his demeanor.
Police let Rivera go that day, but they eventually closed in on him. He agreed to let them search his car, agreed to go in for questioning, and continued to speak to officers after they read some of his rights the first time. Then Rivera took officers to where he said he put Molly Tibbetts' body.
Where we were stopped on our left, there was standing corn, but there was a long, empty, I wouldn't even call it a field drive. It was just a long lane looked like it'd been in like an old driveway or something, just right in the middle of the cornfield. He told us that's where we would find her. Mr. Rivera told us that we would find her be on the east side of that kind of opening that I described. I don't remember if he gave us like a distance, gave us a general area to start looking. So he was left in the car while myself, Special Agent Valletta, Special Agent Potratz, and Sheriff Kriegel and I went into the cornfield.
Were you able to locate the body after the initial instructions?
No.
Were you given additional instructions?
Yeah, we had Mr. Rivera exit my car and walked him back to where we had gone into the cornfield. So we went back in, and I don't remember how we got. I don't know how he was instructing whoever he was standing with, but somehow we knew that we needed to kind of change our position a little bit. And once we did, after that second set of instructions from him, she was found within a few minutes.
Rivera led authorities to the body of Molly Tibbetts without a proper Miranda warning. The state is trying to get around that problem several ways, including by arguing that someone would have found the body anyway. It's called the legal doctrine of inevitable discovery, and it has its roots in Iowa.
Deputy, during your investigation, did you have, or any other officers have, discussions with local farmers?
I did not, but I know several of our deputies and sheriff did. We received numerous calls from local farmers that were obviously aware of what was going on, and were concerned about what to look for and what to do if they found her. I think they were kind of nervous about maybe her being in a cornfield and harvesting their crops in the fall and maybe finding her.
Did the farmers express a concern that it would be a likelihood that they would find her?
Sustained.
Okay, that came very close to calling for a legal conclusion, so that's probably why the judge shut it down. The defense cross-examined that witness about Rivera's language barrier, about whether he was really free to leave his early interviews, and that pesky question of why the state claims Rivera was not properly read his rights, because the officer who questioned him didn't have a Miranda card at the sheriff's department.
Does the Poweshiek County Sheriff's Office have access to a Miranda card?
Oh, yeah.
Do you routinely use a Miranda card?
Yes.
Every time?
When it's practical, yes.
Well, when would it not be practical in the Poweshiek County Sheriff's Office?
I don't know. I'm just saying it probably doesn't happen 100% of the time. In a controlled environment, I have a card with me at all times. We have forms in the office. Yeah, if it's at all possible, I'd read it off a card. I'm not saying I've done it every single time, but yeah, the vast majority, I would say yes.
So in the Sheriff's Office on August 20th, any officer would have had access to the Poweshiek County Miranda form?
Yes.
In English and in Spanish?
Yes.
And that form could have been presented to Mr. Bahena if the officer elected to?
Yes.
In your review of the file, have you seen any such form used in this case?
I have not.
The officer admitted that Defendant Rivera took authorities to the scene where he allegedly disposed of Molly Tibbetts' body before officers properly read his rights. Then cross-examination about that concept of inevitable discovery. Remember, people had been searching for Tibbetts for more than a month before Rivera led authorities to the body, and no one inevitably discovered her during that time. But police say the body was above ground, covered only with corn leaves.
Not all the evidence from Ms. Tibbetts has been located, correct? I mean, we're missing a Fitbit, right?
Right.
We're missing a phone or an iPod, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Anything else we're missing that we knew she had in her possession?
No, not that she had in her possession. We're still missing some other items that we'd like to find.
A murder weapon?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And no one has come forward after the harvest and said, I found these items, have they?
No.
And that includes all these farmers that have called in, right?
I assume so. Yep.
And you had 7 officers out there in this cornfield that day looking for Ms. Tibbetts, and you were having a hard time finding her, fair?
Yes.
And you knew a general area where she was, fair?
Yes.
It took Mr. Bahena to pinpoint the location, fair to say?
Yes.
The state asked another agent about whether or not the body would have been inevitably found.
I know the farmers were pretty anxious. Nobody wanted to be the one to find her. And I had heard, I remember it was the sheriff or chief deputy had told me once that the farmers were just worried that they would have to go really slow during harvest for fear of coming across Molly.
Lots of corn in the field?
Everywhere.
and other crops like soybeans. Would that be true?
Yes.
All right. At some point, would the corn be harvested?
It would. I grew up here. I was never a farmer, but I always have a good idea of I had a lot of relatives that were farming, so I knew that the fields would be harvested usually late October, around that time.
And when the corn is harvested, it's cut, correct?
Yes.
Which would expose the ground.
Yes.
More so, is that right?
That's correct.
If Molly Tibbetts would not have been found at that point, would law enforcement have continued to search?
We were, if I remember correctly, we were planning expanding our search even that day.
Back now to attorney Latonia Hines. So Latonia, the judge basically needs to reconcile whether this poor young woman's body would have been found regardless of Rivera leading the authorities straight to it. Do you think the state had enough in there to prove inevitable discovery or not?
So here's the thing. We have to look at the location of where this is happening. It's happening here in Iowa. So it would seem for the state, they're saying, hey, look, this is not an uncommon idea or thought that somebody's going to be harvesting corn and that they would find the body there, because this is something that happens here. It is what happens in this geographical region. It's the same type of thought process of being in South Florida and canals, and the fact that, you know, that would be a place that somebody could possibly have a body there and that you might find somebody there. So for this, they went and they spent a lot of time about this harvesting and about the fact that it was coming up and the fact that this could happen. And so I think on some levels, the prosecution had to do what they needed to do to try their best to save this, this find. And I think they did a good job with what they had. This is the reason why you really have to train officers. Like, you cannot make them, I hate to say it, you can't make a mistake, because it's things like this where you don't want somebody who we obviously are aware knew where the body was, knew what happened to her on some levels. You don't want that to be lost.
Look, I mean, the bottom line here is that we're trying to do all these hoop jumps and somersaults to get around the Miranda issue. If the Miranda had been read properly on a form that was in the Sheriff's Department, we probably wouldn't be having this degree of a hearing. Thanks a lot, Latonia, and thanks for those of you watching along with us. We'll be back tomorrow at 5 o'clock Eastern right here on the Law and Crime Network.